that first 10 pounds that they may gain in perimenopause. And they're like, well, I used to be able to just go out and cut back what I'm eating for a week and go to the gym every day and knock that 10 pounds off. And they're like, that doesn't work anymore at all. Matter of fact, I went out and did that for the last 10, 14 days and I actually gained weight. Because the rules of the game have changed now. So let's tie that back into diet. So what we know about metabolic health and how that would relate to hormonal health is that what you're most interested in doing is it's the controlling of your hormonal response to the food that you put in your mouth.
I'm your host, Kim Hines, and welcome to the Emotional Eats podcast. I'm on a mission to show you that what you consume, not just the food, affects your entire life. Midlife is different. Let's dig into the real reasons why you eat when you're not hungry and why you're not feeling well. My guest and I are going to give you doable solutions and help you let go of perfectionism, food rules, and stress to make changes that will last a lifetime. If you're ready to ditch old school diet culture and nourish your entire life, this is the show for you. Welcome to episode 63 of the Emotional Eats podcast. In this episode, I get to join Dr. Jay Wrigley for a second time. First time he was here, we got together in episode 31 to talk about perimenopause. And Dr. Jay gave an incredible explanation of what's happening with our bodies during that time. So I suggest you go back and just check out that episode. We will have a little bit of overlap today, but I had more questions about issues that women are dealing with in midlife. So some of the highlights are, we talk about autoimmune disorders, we talk about thyroid function, and we talk about PCOS a little bit, a lot about gut health, and we do touch upon perimenopause and menopause again. We really parked it though on diet and all the hormonal changes during perimenopause and menopause, because mostly what I get asked from women in midlife is all about how do I eat during this time in my life. And then I ask a couple other questions of him of things that I've even seen online and I'm curious about. So join us. I hope you have lots more questions because we can always bring Dr. J back. But let us know what you think of this episode. And I'd love to know if you go back and listen to episode 31 also. Make sure you subscribe, download, and give us a rating and review. Enjoy the show. Dr. J, welcome back to the Emotional Eats podcast.
Glad to be here, Kim.
I'm glad to have you back. So I don't have that many people that have come back for a second showing. So I'm honored to have you back. And that's how amazing that first episode was. So I'm going to tell the listeners really quick. On episode 31, when we got together, we had a discussion mostly around perimenopause because we have so many women who are asking questions. You were making so many connections for us, understanding what's happening with the estrogen, progesterone. So I encourage everyone to go back and listen to that episode. And there's so much more to talk about with women's health. So I invited you back and I'd love for you to share. We have your full background in episode 31, but for people who are just jumping in now, give us a little bit about your background and what drew you to functional medicine.
Okay. So, I began the course of my educational career as if I was going to be a surgeon, basically. And through a number of things that happened, one of them was taking a job in the hospital as a phlebotomist. And I began to realize that what I was seeing in working in a hospital was, I didn't see anything that was related to wellness really in the hospital. This was the manufacturing of the treatment of disease by managing symptoms with medications and putting people in rooms with small windows with barely any light. And it really kind of depressed me. And I thought, I'm getting ready to put in a lot of years to end up in this cycle. And so it kind of, I guess, freaked me out a little bit. And so I took a step back and said, I need to see if this is what I really want to do. And at that point, I went and did some traveling, and I ended up spending quite a bit of time, about a year and a half, in Southeast Asia. And while I was there, mainly in Malaysia and Thailand and Indonesia, Bali, these kind of areas, I was paying attention to their approach to healthcare in Asia. And what I found fascinating about it was the complete opposite. It was everything was about, if you're not well, what you needed to have done was to be nurtured back to health. And you needed to be, strengthened and built back and eat correctly, and to use medicines that were not created in laboratories so much, but more of a kind of a holistic approach. That really kind of struck me. And so, to try to speed this up a little bit, I came back to the States and realized I want both. I want to comment. I want the education of the U.S. medical system, because it sits at the top pretty much of the educational part of the human sciences of anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and all that kind of stuff. But I also knew that I wanted to be trained and have an experience in the more of a holistic functional medicine side. So I began to seek out where was that good combination. And so it led me first to go to medical school in Oregon. Then it led me to Chapel Hill, where I kind of got my master's degree in biochemistry. And after that, when I felt like I was close to ready to build a practice, I decided that's when I went and spent the time to go through the full program of functional medicine. So I kind of got educated from a lot of different perspectives and felt like this is what I was looking for. And along the way, I met a mentor in the clinical part of this studies or whatnot, and she kind of took me under her wing. She was a teacher and a clinician and a brilliant doctor, and her heart and passion was in basically female hormonal chemistry. I mean, that's what she did. She did function as a gynecologist, but that was less work. Than she did more work around hormonal balancing and working through women through hormonal issues, including endocrine problems like thyroid and stuff like this, but a lot of walking women through peri and post-menopause who are having challenges and symptoms and stuff like that. So she taught me an incredible amount, which was interesting as a young man, to have that, kind of has been my specialty for 27, 28 years now. It leads me into some interesting places. Still the kind of the skepticism of, you're a man, how do you really understand what we're going through as a woman? And I feel like I have, I can see that side. I can also see how fortunate I've been to be able to, I probably understand female hormonal chemistry better than most doctors that I know, and I know a lot. I think that once, I get the chance to really to work with the women and the thousands of women that I have now, and they understand that, wow, he knows what's going on. And it gives me an advantage to be able to kind of peer with them and build this relationship with women, and walk them through what's taking place here when we're dealing with a hormonal shift, and how do we get that back into balance, and how do we pay attention to how the hormonal shift in perimenopause, let's say, begins to affect things like the adrenal gland function and thyroid function. Because so many women struggle with weight loss, right? Through perimenopause and into menopause. A lot of that's not just the estrogen, testosterone progesterone piece of this, a lot of that is the body's response to these declining hormones and producing more cortisol, which is going to put a brake on fat loss, which is going to interfere with the thyroid's ability to convert its inactive form T4 into T3. And it's a big circle. But when you see this whole model playing forth and why this woman would be feeling this way, and have her understand that you're not broken at all. You need to be kind of one click shifted back into a state of hormonal balance that you haven't seen in a long time. And when we do that, and we do that correctly, the light comes on, the energy comes back, the zest for life comes back, the sleeping patterns return to normal, the anxiety goes away, and then they become better fat burners and they can get leaner, and all that kind of stuff. So that's a big answer to the question of what landed me into what I do now was seeking out lots of different types of knowledge that I wanted to, including things outside of the box of standard allopathic medicine. But, I bring in, some of my education around everything from Chinese medicine to some Ayurvedic stuff. And it's useful because I can see these patterns and I can help women out a lot better that way.
And that's so inspiring. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you back is not only are you so well versed in that hormonal chemistry, but you're very empathetic to women going through the stages that they're going through. And we're given sometimes in medicine, we're given very narrow ways to solve our problems. And it's not always going into lifestyle, which you do. It's just pretty much here's the medication and here we go. And you can look at things on such a broader level because so many doctors, I have some very wonderful doctors and a gynecologist that is wonderful, but I even have moved on to someone else to look at the whole package because like you said, cortisol is such a big player along with other things that women are not even told about and they're not even asked to get tested. And so I do want to bring you into something that's been happening in my practice a lot as a health coach. I have so many women over 40 who are being diagnosed with, let's start with autoimmune, because there's so many ways we can go with this, with different autoimmune disorders. And you can tell me what the right terminology, for that is. But what I'm curious about is, let's start with autoimmune before we even get into why this might be happening. What is, when people hear this, because there's some people who are not dealing with autoimmune symptoms, what does autoimmune mean?
Okay, so at its basics, an autoimmune disorder is simply where that something has provoked a response of the immune system to begin to attack tissue that would normally be healthy tissue that the immune system doesn't have, really a reason to bother. And so some of the most common ones there would be, problems with thyroid function like Hashimoto's disease, where the body is sending out an immune response to actually attack the thyroid gland. And that's causing problems with thyroid function. And it can go both ways of either, usually in the beginnings of Hashimoto's, you're going to see an accelerated thyroid function, almost like it basically is hyperthyroidism. And that can be true for Graves' disease, which is another autoimmune thyroid problem. But again, a lot of times when the first reaction begins to happen with the immune system attacking the thyroid will speed up a lot of times. And this person may have problems with anxiety and feeling anxious all the time and feeling, too revved up and hot, and they might be losing weight, losing hair, and these types of things. And then usually what happens is the thyroid will kind of burn itself out because it's been running hot so long, and they'll go into hypothyroidism. And that's where they get into the issues where they spend most of their time with that disorder of the lower side of functioning of thyroid, where everything begins to slow down. The metabolism slows down. Um, the people begin to gain weight, not sleep well, skin gets dry, issues with constipation, issues with listlessness, fatigue, and just it goes on and on and on, because the thyroid is so important to all of metabolic function that when it begins to slow down, just about every part of your life is affected, and it's not fun at all. But again, circling back around, so in its basic form, something has caused the body to mount an immune response to an organ or a tissue that should not be happening. Now, when we kind of trace this back to where this comes from, um, there's a lot of we don't know exactly in all cases where these things do come from. What we have a strong suspicion of now is that, in my practice anyway, for almost 30 years, is that the relationship between gut health and autoimmune problems is heavily rooted now and well documented and well cited with peer review studies or whatnot. And how that usually looks is that a person will develop something that we call intestinal permeability. And what that means really is that the lining of the digestive tract has begun to form little gaps in between the cells that line the digestive tract and the bloodstream. And these little gaps, now food is starting to get into the bloodstream before it's completely digested. Now, when that happens, what the immune system does not know that this partially digested food is food at this point, or a nutrient or whatnot. It sees it as incomplete, and it sees it as a probable threat to the body. So the immune system will have to make a response and go after this undigested food. Well, when that happens, this sets off an inflammatory reaction, and the immune system begins to kind of go haywire. And that's where we see that it begins to show up in other places. And some things, when we see something like Crohn's disease or celiac or ulcerative colitis, these are other autoimmune disorders. Or in women, we will see things like endometriosis, which at this point has not been classified as an autoimmune disorder, but I believe that you're going to see that real soon, that the medical literature will be putting things like endometriosis in the autoimmune category of what's happening here is the immune system has confused the endometrial lining of the uterus as a threat, and it's like mounting this immune response against it, and things are beginning to get out of balance there. So it's difficult to explain the 100% true nature of what always is the root cause of autoimmune disorders, where the immune system is going after healthy tissue. But we at least know at this point that you need to be looking at your gut health if you're dealing with one of these disorders, because if there's an issue there and you don't get that cleared up, you're not going to get on top of this thing and ahead of this thing and reverse this autoimmune condition. Whereas a lot of times we will see that if you do the work to repair the microbiota, the microbiome, and the gut function and whatnot, that you've watched that the autoimmune disorders, even though they seem to be far away from anywhere related to the digestive system, begin to clear up. So, we always want to take care of the gut when we start to work with anybody around any type of autoimmune disorder.
That's amazing. And you mentioned some that I had not even thought about, the Crohn's and the celiac. Thank you for bringing in endometriosis, because there are more and more women that I am seeing that have been dealing with that. And also, is PCOS considered autoimmune?
No, we would consider PCOS more of a metabolic disorder.
Okay.
Now, in certain cases, there may be a piece of autoimmunity there, but that's not That's not nearly as that would be those would be rare cases. Typically, when you're looking at PCOS, you're looking at we believe now that the root cause of PCOS is insulin resistance, where it begins with the body's inability to metabolize and understand the relationship between blood sugar and insulin. And when insulin becomes there's a resistance to insulin, and the body can't get glucose into the cells. Then there becomes this issue, and in these women who are susceptible, what will happen is this begins to affect the ovarian function, and they will begin to produce cysts on their ovaries. Hence the word polycystic. But really, what's happening here is that where their symptoms show up with they're producing massive amounts of like androgen or male hormones, and so these women will have problems with growing facial hair, growing hair in places that typically women would not. Sometimes even like male pattern baldness and things like that. But at the heart of it, it's a metabolic issue where the hormones are over responding at the ovary level, leading to probably the biggest problem is infertility. Most women that I see that have problems conceiving have some form of PCOS. Now, the good news is that PCOS is not that hard to treat if you have a compliant patient. Because again, if you get your diet correct and you get your insulin levels low and you get your body to be a fat burner, that's going to take a lot of the stress off of this. If you get estrogen and progesterone back in balance, because there's always a disproportionate relationship between estrogen and progesterone with PCOS, usually in favor of too much estrogen, not enough progesterone. That's got to be corrected, or they're going to keep this over response and make all these androgen hormones and have all these problems with with some growing facial hair and things like that. So, but it's not as complicated as it may sound to get a woman and reverse that whole cycle and become non-PCOS if she's willing to do the work, because you're not going to get there eating a crappy diet for sure. You've got to get that. You got to get a handle on on eating a protein-rich, lower carbohydrate type of a diet in order to get back to metabolic health and fat burning. And then the ovaries will begin to start taking care of themselves and repairing. And
that's great. I appreciate you giving that explanation, because I think we do loop that in with autoimmune, but it sounds like some of the same nutritional guidelines would apply. And I'd love to get back to, speaking of the autoimmune, I do want to get into the tips and talk about nutrition and exercise. But what I would also love to know is, let's say someone thinks something's going on and they've been playing Dr. Google and they're not really sure, what kind of testing can they get done with a functional medicine doctor like you? And maybe you can also explain, there's one test that a lot of my clients have had done, the ANA test for inflammation. So what do you do when someone you may think that they're in this range, or are you already testing for everything and then you find that? How does that work for you?
I do it a little differently because I think it's just how long I've been doing this. And so I might not be the greatest. I mean, I'm just going to give you my opinion, and then another doctor probably has a completely different way that they do this. I am not trigger happy on testing at all, like a lot of especially functional medicine doctors. I don't see that as very useful, because what I see is that that's playing the same game that mainstream medicine plays of, let's find numbers that are out of balance, and then let's put those numbers back into balance with whatever therapeutic vehicle that we use, often to find out that at the end of the day, in all of this work, and the numbers are now lining up better in the middle of a reference range, the patient is going, hey, but I don't feel any better. So I think, to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense of like, let's chase numbers and let's try to put TSH levels where they're supposed to be. Now, those things are important as markers, But finding, and again, let's go back to what you're talking about, the ANA. So this is a test that's looking for anti-nuclear antibodies. This is if you have an elevated ANA, then you're going to, this means, excuse me for that. Excuse me. So this means that your immune system is hyperactive. It's in a state of panic, basically, and it's going after all kinds of things. And so you're extremely susceptible to having some type of an autoimmune disorder. So then if you find that, then you need to get more specific about what kind of things how's the patient presenting? Are they having digestive issues that makes you think that maybe we're susceptible here for Crohn's disease or celiac? Is their problem looking more like, things that we would draw back to thyroid function? And then you would maybe look at, I would want to look at things like free T3 levels, and are you getting thyroid hormone into the cells of your body, into the mitochondria? Because too often doctors are looking at, let's just run your TSH level, and if that falls into normal reference range, then you don't have a thyroid problem. Well, that's just ridiculous at this point. It's your TSH level is so insignificant in a way to all of the other markers of thyroid function. Of, is T4 converting to T3? Is T3 getting into the receptor site on the cell body? Is estrogen blocking T3 from getting into the cells of the body? There's so many things that are missed by, here's what your TSH level is, and it seems to be okay, so you don't have a thyroid problem. I see this every single day, and they end up definitely having a thyroid issue, even with a good TSH level. And when you get that corrected, then this person gets their life back, rather than chasing around to doctors who go, well, you don't have a thyroid problem because your TSH level is up. But so anyway, I think that what the question was from Kim is that, how do we test for specifically, various autoimmune disorders? We, if I suspect that, I'm going to first look for inflammation. So I'm going to be interested in levels of C-reactive protein, number one. I probably would run an ANA. I am going to be looking for, there is in my way of thinking, and again, this might be biased because of the work that I do, but I never see an autoimmune disorder that doesn't have a huge hormonal component to it. So, and I've gotten to the point now where I'd rather know more about what's going on with the hormonal biochemistry to solve and find out that there's an autoimmune disorder than I would to chase after certain numbers like ANAs and things like that. So if you gave me the preference, I would probably run a Dutch test on a woman and find out every bit about what's going on with estrogen and progesterone and cortisol and testosterone. And then some of the markers that do come in there with the immunoglobulins. So the immunoglobulins are proteins, for those who don't know this, that make up our immune system, and they're very susceptible to getting out of balance, and they need to be screened for sometimes and corrected. And a lot of where we see these types of issues with immunoglobulins come up is that people are under so much stress today, and people often are doing aggressive things to either for whatever driving them, whether it's they're terrified of weight gain or the weight that they have gained, and they're doing these huge calorie restrictive diets with massive amounts of exercise and things like this. What'll happen is your body's protein needs, if you are stressed out and you're underfeeding yourself, and especially if you're doing a lot of exercise, are increasing dramatically. So for these people who are not feeding themselves enough good quality protein, your body's going to find that protein somewhere. And the easiest protein for your body to break down and use for structure and function and fuel is the immune system. And it's these immunoglobulins, these proteins that make up your immune system. This is why we see an example of this is why long distance marathon runners have a tendency to be fantastic at what they do. If, at that level, the ones who are elite runners, are pretty amazing what they're able to accomplish. They also have a tendency to be sick a lot in between marathons. They are the ones who are very susceptible to catching colds and flus and viruses and things like this. And it's because their body is feeding off of their immune system as their protein needs when they're out running 25 miles, 26 miles, and they've run out of a protein source. Your body's going to start attacking those immunoglobulins, and then you're left with low levels, and then you're susceptible to all these types of germs and things far more than the regular person. So these drastic measures that we see a lot of times people are taking. I work with a lot of women who basically been or are on the borderline of eating disorders because of they're in panic mode of what's going on with their weight or what they don't want to happen with their weight or whatnot, and they're not feeding themselves correctly, and they're over exercising, and they're breaking down their immune system, and again, this circles all the way back around, and it makes them more susceptible for an autoimmune disorder because they're messing with these very specific proteins that if they get out of balance, they're going to start utilizing and going after tissues that they don't normally would never do. And then you end up with one of these problems. And then, lastly, there's a genetic component to this. And so a lot of people are doing a lot of gene testing now for looking for specific genetic expressions or mutations within their DNA genes, and finding there that these people are susceptible to more of autoimmune type disorders. And so that gets a little confusing because what do you really do about that? There have been a couple of books. Dirty Genes, people may have heard of, is a great book to educate you about how to look for whether you possibly have genetic mutations and things like that. But when it gets down to the therapeutics of it, it gets a little spotty. That's not real well rooted in science yet. People are throwing massive amounts of nutritional supplementation at people and hoping something sticks, basically being way over too supplemented. And I don't find that to be very useful. I think if anything, what you're doing is you're giving the body more work to do than it really wants to do. If you're swallowing 35 supplements every day, your liver's got to process all of that stuff, and your liver's already challenged by the autoimmune thing that we're talking about in the first place, and you're going to give it that much more work to do and hope that somewhere in there one of these nutrients was what you were deficient in and clears this problem up. That's it's kind of a crapshoot, basically.
That's really interesting. I have two things that I want to come back to that you said that are so interesting. There's so many interesting things here, but one of them you were talking about, in addition to maybe testing AMA, finding out if there's inflammation, you talked about the hormonal testing. And what's so fascinating is in this age group, we have people who are probably getting symptoms from both perimenopause and autoimmune. So doing that hormonal testing is fantastic because that could be very much part of what's going on, and those symptoms are overlapping. Sure. And I would also love to comment on the supplementing. It's interesting because there is probably a time and a place for supplementation based on maybe what people can get as far as their nutrition. But the actual word description is to supplement what we have going on as opposed to replacing. So I
Sure.
do think that that's fascinating, that a lot of the questions that come even at me as a health coach are, hey, what do you think about these supplements? And we haven't even dug down deep to the original, hey, what are you eating? What is going into your mouth every day? So I'd love to transition actually to that point, because you have some really great points. If anybody is going to go out afterwards and go onto Instagram and Twitter and watch Dr. J, you have some really good information about diet and how our bodies are taking in this food. So you started with protein. So share anything that you would like to share with us on really the role of nutrition, and then we'll get into other lifestyle factors.
Okay. Well, the way that I see nutrition, I'm trying to work through how, if I want to go towards, I mean, do we want to keep this in the realm of basically women that would be between 42 and 65? So the whole perimenopause, into menopause, through menopause.
Yeah. And
We
the
want to target
overlap of
that. I
autoimmune.
see.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking that question is because I see it as there's a, when I'm gonna stick with what I know. All right, I'm gonna put it into my wheelhouse. I'm gonna be more comfortable there. So, as y'all probably know, I work primarily with peri and postmenopausal women. So, what I see about and how that relates to diet is that um, when there's a change in the hormonal landscape, and this is going to start in your early 40s, some women will start in the late 30s, but there's going to be in the early 40s, there's going to be a shift that takes place. And that first shift is that progesterone levels are going to begin to drop. And your estrogen levels are going to stay where they are for quite a period of time before they begin to drop. So right off the bat, somewhere in the mid 40s, usually, or anywhere from 42 to 45 years old, you're going to find the first um, women. I don't know any of them that don't have some experience where they, without them knowing it, they are in what we call an estrogen dominant state, because it's not about the level of estrogen or the level of progesterone. It's about the ratio between the two of them. So if progesterone levels begin to drop and estrogen has stayed the same, then the gap between those two hormones has now begun to get further and further apart. This is what we call estrogen dominance, because progesterone's one of its goals, or one of its actions, is to antagonize estrogen and make sure that estrogen doesn't run wild, because if estrogen runs wild, you're going to have a bunch of problems that you don't really want to have. So let's talk about some of those. So usually a woman somewhere in the ages of what I said, 42 to 45 or whatnot, is going to start to find that when this gap between estrogen and progesterone begins to shift, and she becomes estrogen dominant, she's going to find that her cycles become irregular. Usually they're going to start coming closer together. The bleeding is going to be heavier. There's going to be more signs of PMS the week before the period, breast tenderness, cravings, mood swings, insomnia, a whole list of other issues or whatnot. This is because of that gap between estrogen and progesterone. So where I'm trying to get to is that when this shift begins to happen, now later estrogen is going to start to fall too, and testosterone, which is it's not talked about a lot in women's therapy, but women need testosterone just as much as men do. They just don't they don't produce as much of it as a man does, but it's a vital hormone. And that one begins to drop too, the closer you get to menopause. So how I'm going to try to tie this in is that as this hormonal landscape shifts in favor of menopause, moving towards menopause and into menopause, and these three hormones begin to drop, it it changes the entire hormonal landscape inside the woman's body. And so therefore, now you have become so much more efficient at storing energy than you are at releasing energy. So this is why it's so hard for women to find that first 10 pounds that they may gain in perimenopause. And they're like, well, I used to be able to just go out and cut back what I'm eating for a week and go to the gym every day and knock that 10 pounds off. And they're like, that doesn't work anymore at all. Matter of fact, I went out and did that for the last 10, 14 days and I actually gained weight. Because the rules of the game have changed now. So let's tie that back into diet. So what we know about metabolic health and how that would relate to hormonal health is that what you're most interested in doing is it's the controlling of your hormonal response to the food that you put in your mouth. So you want to be eating foods that don't spike a lot of insulin. So because when you have elevated insulin, which turns on the storage mechanism, which means that your body now is in storage mode, it's not in fat burning mode. That's going to be a problem, especially when now you're a better fat storer than you are a fat releaser. So we want to the diet now that I see that works the best for peri and post menopause would be a diet that watches and controls the intake of carbohydrate food and keeps that at a fairly low level. Now, it's very variable because of things like activity levels. If you have somebody who's, a woman who's doing CrossFit 3 times a week and also runs and does high intensity interval training twice a week or whatnot, this person's not going to do very well on a ketogenic diet. There's just not enough carbohydrate being able to be supplied there. And where that's going to show up is it's going to show up with damaging your thyroid gland. And then you got a big problem. I feel like I got so off track, but I'm trying to tie in the
No,
picture.
But you're basically describing me in my 40s because I was a marathon runner. I actually pulled in CrossFit at one point. I am now hypothyroid. So you are actually laying out everything. And I used to eat a much more vegetarian style diet before I learned better. So you have nailed it. And many, many, many of my clients have the same story. We can't do what we did in our 20s and 30s. We are doubling down and it's actually having the opposite effect.
Absolutely.
So you are so on track with that. But yes, I love to hear what you're hoping to help people with now.
Yeah. So to try to polish that up, and I mean, it's something that we could talk about for 17 days. But to try to get to the bullet points that would be useful to women is to understand that through these phases of life, what's going to work best is you want to take care of satiety first. You want to be on a way of eating that doesn't leave you hungry and that you feel like you're on some kind of restrictive diet. You don't want to feel like you're on a diet at all. And the way to do that is to make sure that you balance your protein and fat more than anything else in favor of a higher protein diet than most people typically think about eating. I think women who are perimenopausal and even into menopause need to be focusing somewhere close to about a gram of protein per pound of, I want to say, per pound of body weight or ideal body weight.
Yeah,
but it's targeted. A little bit more trickier than that, because what you would have to do is go, ideally, let's say you had a woman that was weighed 180 pounds. And her ideal weight is to get down to 140 pounds. So you would tell a lot of women with that scenario I just used, you need to be eating 140 grams of protein a day to get to that ideal body weight. Now, you don't really need to eat 140, because what you need to do is you need to factor in there that a pretty a pretty good body fat percentage for most perimenopausal and menopausal women would be 20%. That would be a good, it might be ideally to drop, some of those women might ideally need to drop that down to 15%, but you start to get any lower than that, and that would be for elite driven athletes, and it's hard to get there, it's hard to stay there, and it's hard to be well there. So anyway, I use the number 20%. So you take that 140 grams of protein and you multiply that, or you take the 20% off. So you're taking 28 grams of protein out of there, and that leaves you with what, 100 what did we do?
So we did 140
and minus
20%.
28.
So we take 28 out of there.
So you got 112.
Awesome. So 112. Yeah.
So
former math teacher here had a hard time with that.
Yeah, right. So
112. Okay.
Would be a really good kind of bullseye for a woman who weighed 180, wanted to weigh 140, but wants to eat a higher protein diet. And then from 112, there's a very variable. She could go up, higher than that to 120, 130. Some people find it's hard to get that much protein in their diet. But I think that they need to be on the higher side. So I would, start with, say 112 to 120 is what this person wants to focus on. Yeah. Then what she wants to do is she wants to keep her carbohydrates on, fairly on the lower side. That would mean to me, utilizing carbohydrates, that would be, I love cruciferous vegetables for women. I think they have so many benefits as long as they're cooked. So things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, these types of things have so many phytonutrients in it that are great for keeping estrogen from stockpiling and getting into that estrogen dominant stuff. So those would be great. Berries, I'm a big fan of berries, although I want to keep carbs fairly low. And berries are low carbohydrate fruits, so I think they fit in there perfectly. Things like asparagus and avocado, which is actually, avocado is a fruit, but those are, and then keeping starches out of the diet for the most part, unless you're a trainer. Like, if you're training for something like running marathons or whatnot, I think that there's a place to add some safe starch into your diet, probably a few times a week. But for most women who are looking to lose weight, you want to keep your carbohydrate diet to a lower carbohydrate diet. And that would be with the things that I just said, to, let the carbohydrates come from things like those vegetables and avocados and berries, Greek yogurt. And then primarily your protein sources would be, the best of the best is always going to be rumnit meat. So that's your beef, lamb, venison, if you could get things like that. And then good quality fish, some pork, some poultry, lots of eggs. Eat a bunch of eggs. Eggs are like perfect food. And then, for those who want to really get zoned in and want to see an amazing thing shift in their life, try to begin to find ways to prepare and get a little bit of organ meat in your diet.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
What'll happen if you eat a little bit of beef liver or beef heart.
Oh, for those of us who have PTSD of eating liver with our parents when we were young. No, it's interesting. Sure. I do know that there are so many benefits, and I've seen you post about it. And so that's we'll move women into that after we get the protein. I think it is really challenging to get women to eat enough protein. And what's interesting too is we have been kind of fed some other things along the way in the diet world, and fat and protein were definitely where women would skimp because of the things that they were told them, what they thought was real information. And the other thing I love that you brought up that really hits home with a lot of people in my audience are the ideas of feeling satisfied and feeling full from your meal. And protein and fat really does do that. It keeps you fuller longer. And going back to the insulin resistance and blood sugar issues, when we are eating all the time, sometimes it's because the food that we're eating is not filling us up and keeping us full long enough. And then we're not giving that nice amount of time between meals to come back down and be steady. And so I
Absolutely.
really appreciate that you brought that up. But I also love that you did bring up some veggies because just all the benefits and having that fiber. But you said really something interesting. I can only eat my vegetables cooked. I can do some leafy greens and things like that, but I cannot eat any broccoli or anything like that unless it's cooked. What was your reasoning for telling women to cook it?
Well, two. One is is the cruciferous family that I mainly mentioned the cooking of is there's there is potential for this class of vegetables are called goitrogens. Okay, and the reason for that is because in raw cruciferous vegetables there are some phyto anti-nutrients called goitrogens that can interfere with thyroid function. And we don't ever want to do anything that could jeopardize thyroid function, especially in women who are 40 and beyond, because that is the gland that you want to be firing at its optimal. It's going to be what's going to help you, not have issues with insomnia or weight gain or skin problems and all so much more. So anyway, once you cook these vegetables, or all you have to do is lightly steam them, but that that nullifies the goitrogen in the cruciferous vegetable, and now it has no negative bearing on thyroid function at all. So that's why I mentioned cooking them. The other one would be that plants are abrasive. There's no doubt about two things about I look at plants now and go, they will do just about anything they can to not be eaten. That's what they do. They don't want to be eaten by anything. And so they create all kinds of defense systems. And this is why so many people do really well on carnivore diets now. Now, here's how I feel about things like that. I think the carnivore diet is a absolutely brilliant thing for the beginnings of the treatment of an autoimmune disorder, because what it's doing is it is clearing out the possibility that any of this plant fiber that hits the lining of the gut wall that can stimulate everything from inflammation to block the absorption of minerals like calcium and magnesium with things like phytates that come from a lot of vegetables or whatnot. So anyway, eating a pure animal-based diet for a period of time to stabilize the gut wall to get to the bottom of an autoimmune disorder, amazing. And that's how I'll start most people. But the end goal is to have them be able to eat as much variety in their diet as they possibly can without negative consequences to that. So what does that mean? That means that you have to reach a state of really good metabolic health. When you're in really good metabolic health and your body knows how to use fat for fuel, it knows how to jump over and use sugar for fuel, glucose when it needs to, but it primarily wants to burn fat instead of sugar for fuel, then you're in a state of metabolic health where you're going to be able to eat a lot of variety in your diet. But to get there, sometimes you need to go through a period of time where you eat a fairly restrictive diet. And that's just the way that it goes. So we were talking about plant. So that, the two reasons for that is, one, they can be fairly abrasive if a person's already has digestive issues, would be one for the cruciferous vegetables. The other, why we would want to cook them and soften them up. And the other one would be to deactivate the goitrogen so that we don't get a thyroid problem.
That's great. I love that explanation. It's interesting too, the women that I work with, when they're eating more, like we just talked about, we do see a lessening in sugar cravings. We obviously have to go to the root cause of emotional eating and stress eating, which is the stress and the emotions. But when they are consciously nourishing themselves in this way, it really helps take part of the battle away. Because when we're
Absolutely.
eating all that starchy food and the processed food and the sugar, it's tipping the gut, the taste buds, and the brain in that direction. So this is
Absolutely.
powerful. Okay, I have a question for you because this is a word that comes up a lot these days. What about oxalates?
Okay, so oxalates, again, this is another what we call anti-nutrient that's found in plant food that has the ability to interfere in I wouldn't say in everybody. I think there's a lot of people out there that have they use this as kind of fear mongering and, oh, you should never eat foods that have oxalates in it. Well, there's going to be oxalate in just about every food that you're going to eat. Now, certainly they're higher in many plant species, and things like spinach and whatnot contain, lots of oxalates in them. And these do in select individuals, they will cause problems because, again, what all these, when I use the word anti-nutrients, we're talking about things like phytates, phytic acid, goitrogens, oxalates. There's many more, lectins. What they do is they interfere with the function of the gut wall, and they interfere with your body's ability to absorb minerals. Like I spoke about, two of them, calcium and magnesium, are ones that are very susceptible, that if there's too much of this anti-nutrient stuff in your food, and you're one of those susceptible people that is borderline, that's by eating an oxalate rich diet is enough to put you in jeopardy of all kinds of nutrient deficiencies, regardless of whether you were supplementing or not, because you're not absorbing any of it. So there, you have to kind of keep an eye out for these things, but I would never start off with anybody and go, one of the most important things that we do is let's get you on an oxalate free diet. I think there are far more important things that we need to do than that as a starting point. But it's something that people should be aware of and educate themselves about, and make sure that they're not just eating nothing but high oxalate foods. That's not going to do any good for you anyway.
I think it's also interesting when we can teach people to listen to their bodies more. I think
Yeah.
when we're eating certain types of foods, we have a new normal that is not good, but it's our normal, and we don't really listen and we don't really feel in tune. And sometimes we'll eat things over and over again. I have a bad habit with peanut butter, and I will go months and months without it because I know how it makes me feel. And then one day I'll have it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's not
Right.
something I can have anymore. I have a stomach ache every time. So
Yeah.
teaching people to be in tune, I think, is really important too.
I
And
think
you
that's a
have,
great
go
point,
ahead.
Kim, is that you're looking for, and I hope that most people know what this means now, but I would want everybody to really find out what their N equals one is. So, what we mean by that, for anybody who doesn't understand that terminology, is your N equals one is what is the best way of eating for you. And the way to find that takes it takes a lot of work sometimes. Just like Kim said, you've got, she knows how now she knows how peanut butter reacts in her body, whereas maybe there was a point in her life that it was so masked by other things that she was eating that she had no idea that peanut butter wasn't making her feel good. But finding your N equals one is it's so much more important than listening to somebody on social media who believes that they have the perfect diet for you and that everybody should eat this way and these foods or whatnot, when we don't know that. Here's a big example in my practice now, which is basically just consulting worldwide from wherever I am. But where was I going with that? Oh, in peri and postmenopause, one of the things that's so interesting to see is dairy. I'm just going to throw it out there. Dairy products. Dairy products can be the key to health in one woman and the biggest nightmare to another woman, and neither one of them knows this until they play around with adding and removing dairy from their diet. And I see so many women who cannot get that last 10 pounds off or whatnot until they found out that dairy, which they would told you that I tolerate just fine, was the key to putting the brakes on fat loss. And there's no way that you could get through it without giving up dairy. And when they did, they not only felt better, they lost all the weight. Now, then you'll have another woman who tolerates dairy so well that dairy is actually a health food for this person. Like they feel better, stronger, more mentally clear when they eat things like, high fat Greek yogurt. If they can get things like raw milk and raw cheese and stuff like that, it acts like medicine for one person and is the reason the other person can't get where they want to go. Now, what also interesting happens is that the one that shouldn't eat the dairy is the one who absolutely, you're not taking my dairy.
Don't take my cheese away. That's what I hear all the time. Don't take my cheese.
Exactly. So, but, the other side of that is, what's more important? You want to, feel fantastic. And then also, this takes me into another piece that I think is so important for people to understand. I would be leery of anybody who tells you that they eat perfectly all the time, or that they even know what that means. I don't think any of us know exactly what the perfect human diet is. I think what's so unique and great about the kind of work that, I know that me and you would do with people around diet is I want to get people to the place where they're, finding that N equals 1, that they're doing so well energy wise, metabolic health wise, they're losing the body fat that they wanted to lose or whatnot. And then that needs to be all you need to do at that point is to nail that. I'm going to say 85 to 90% of the time. You hear 80-20 a lot. I think you're better off if you just go with something more like 85 or 90. That way, it still gives you, even if we use 90, if you're kind of nailing and eating your diet and your, high protein, good, healthy vegetables, these types of things, maybe some berries and good quality yogurt, getting, some salmon in your diet occasionally, other seafood if you like it, and all this stuff, then, and if you're doing that 90% of the time, it won't matter what you do 10% of the time. It won't matter. I mean, I'm not like giving anybody kind of a free, here's a pass to go sit down and eat a gallon of Haagen-Dazs, but I'm also not going to tell you that I think that that's going to hurt you either, because if you're nailing it 90% of the time, your body is so unbelievably resilient when it's in a healthy state. Yeah. And people people walk around like it's not. And they talk, I see this all the time with, the 100,000 people that follow me on Twitter are coming up with these. Well, if you ever ate something, a bag of chips or whatnot, you've just wrecked your health that's garbage. This body is built to be so resilient that many people can smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day, take 13 prescription drugs, drink whiskey all day long, and who knows what else, and they function okay. That's just an example of we would never promote anything close to that, but it's hard to kill this thing. I mean, it's the most resilient thing I've ever seen, and you don't have to be that, walking on eggshells about it, but you do need to get the foundation down. You do need to get in a repetitive momentum of that. This is what you do most of the time, and let the repair work happen, let the hormones get back into balance, get the metabolic health back, all of this kind of stuff, and then live your life, live your life and have a little fun when it's time to do that.
I love that. And I think that what happens too mentally and emotionally when we try to be perfect, there's so many women that we work with that grew up high achievers, people pleasers. They already have that problem in their head. And that's why diets have been crazy for them, because literally 30 plus years of dieting and then doubling down in perimenopause, we say, okay, I made a mistake at lunch, and we give up the rest of the day. And that little 10% that we could have been having fun and actually enjoying that food, we now turn into 20, 25% or more because of the emotional baggage and shame and guilt from it. So living that life is really important. And there's always going to be a birthday. There's always going to be a date night. There's always going to be some event. And are you going to be that person that's going to try really hard to, order the salad when that night you really might want just a little side of pasta, or you might want dessert out, or the glass of wine? So I love the way you said that. And I play with numbers a lot. So when I think of, let's even going as high as 90%, let's say you have 21 meals. I actually eat more. I eat 4 a day, not 3. But when you have 21 meals, if you're doing 18, you're only having 3 meals that are maybe off target. That's enjoy, have fun. That's still 90%. But it's challenging, and I appreciate you saying that. So diet we know that is such a big part of everything that has to do with everything, metabolism, immune system, all this hormonal stuff that we're going through. But as we're starting to wrap up, let's start to give the listeners some more things that you find really important, because we know that's a really good foundation. But what are some of the other lifestyle things that you would like to see women doing in order to be feeling better?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I it's not my wheelhouse, so I don't I'm not going to get into the whole thing about exercise and fitness, but I do have my thoughts about how that should play a role and here's the big picture. If you can build into your lifestyle 2 primary around 20-minute sessions a week that is solely focused on strength building, and that can be done in your house, or if you like going to gyms or whatnot. But those 2 sessions, 20 minutes each, twice a week, are focused on pushing your muscles to respond in a way that makes them stronger, which makes your bones stronger, which makes your circulatory system stronger, which makes your hormones more balanced or whatnot. And then you were to couple that with probably 3 sessions a week of just some long, slow cardio. And what I mean by that is there's probably no greater exercise in the world than a long walk, and a long brisk walk where you're trying to keep up a little bit of a pace. But that's probably, that's at the top of all the benefits of aerobic exercise, which doesn't make you lean. That's not how you lose weight. But so it could be cycling, it could be walking, it could be treadmilling, it could be elliptical, it could be whatever. But you would want a few sessions a week where you're doing something repetitive that is keeping your heart rate elevated, but not very, highly elevated. And it's so if you could do a little bit of strength training and a little bit of, this kind of repetitive motion cardio, you've got exercise nailed. Now you want to take it to a whole new level, then throw 1 session a week in there of some kind of high intensity interval training where you go out and go all out for 10 to 15 seconds, on a hill like this, and then back off and then do that again and do that until you can do that like 10 times. That's a whole nother level, but you're talking about burning fat and getting energized and whatever. But if you're not there, don't go do that. Start with the basics that I said. Try to get a few sessions of long, slow cardio, few sessions of spearheading just muscle building. Strength building is the key to exercise, really. I mean,
it really is. Muscle's powerful.
Powerful. So that would be one. Number two, I would say try to get outside more. People don't spend enough time in nature. And I do believe I don't take it to the point where some people, run down this thing of like, oh, the most important thing in the world is grounding. No, it's not. But is it beneficial? I believe it is. I believe if you have an opportunity to get outside and take your shoes off and go barefooted on some grass for a while, that there is no doubt that there's an electromagnetic field to the earth, and that by you connecting to it, does very positive things for you. Now, well, I don't, again, I don't like the taking this to become a religion of grounding or something like that. But there's, taking a walk outside with barefooted is definitely good. And just being outside and getting that vitamin D stimulation through your skin is fantastic. The other one is is relationships. And, you need social activity. And I feel so much for, and I think COVID has had such an impact of isolating people, and a lot of people are alone and don't even have somebody really to pick up the phone and call. And so whatever you can do to make sure that you're strengthening your social network and staying in touch with family and those people that you call close friends or whatnot, I think that's a lifestyle factor that's often looked and should be implemented as lifestyle for sure. And then the last one I'm going to touch on, Kim, is, and you had brought up something about it earlier, but I do a lot of nutritional supplementation in my practice, but I do very targeted nutritional supplementation, meaning that I don't like to see people on bottles and bottles of pills or whatever. But the utilization to drive a specific pathway with a naturally occurring substance, as opposed to using a drug to do that, is a pretty powerful thing. And so if you do have any particular health issues, and I'm speaking to the public out here, you might want to consider, consulting with someone who really understands the usefulness of pharmaceutical grade, third party tested nutritional supplementation for a specific reason, of like lowering blood pressure or stimulating your ovaries to produce more of their own progesterone rather than having to put you on progesterone, which I do a lot of that too. But if I can do it without using the hormone, why would I not want to do that? So there's a lot of ways to use nutritional supplementation to improve the function of an organ. Like thyroid is probably the biggest one. We can get a thyroid to work better by using glandular thyroid tissue that come from a bovine source of a clean animal that still has, it's got all of the nutrients, amino acids, and peptides of your own thyroid, basically. And so you're feeding your thyroid gland to work at a better rate. So there are beautiful things you can do with nutritional supplementation. What is not going to be useful to you at all is to be one of those people who every time you Dr. Google or whatnot, you find some new nutrient that somebody's selling, and the next thing you know, your cabinet is full of 40 bottles of stuff that you're taking every day. That's not doing you any good. It's most of it's ending up in the toilet. Most of it, you don't even know whether what it says is in the bottle, because it's not a well-regulated industry if you're buying this stuff, off the internet or stuff like that. And then again, the bigger problem would be if you're just taking way too much supplements. This is doing nothing more than making your liver have to work too hard. So don't do that.
Oh, I love that. It's really interesting how many things are showing up on TikTok and Instagram. And even I have clients, as you know, mostly 40 and over, but even my younger clients are, sending in messages, what do you think of this? And these supplements without even, asking a doctor, getting tested. And, I'm very leery. And like you said, we do not know what's in that bottle. It's not regulated. So it's very challenging. And somebody the other day, a friend of mine showed me her pill box for the day, and her supplements alone were, I think there was probably 8 in the morning, 5 in the evening. And I said, "Do you know what each of those is actually doing? And can you tell if they're working?" She said, "No."
Yeah,
So it's frightening. But I do want to go back to Dr. J. Some of these tips are so incredible. And the exercise, um, I'm going to go through these again just to remind everyone what you mentioned. And I love the muscle building because again, that ties very heavily into also talking about the protein and you bringing that up and the value and the benefit of having that protein, because we do need that also for the muscle, but also getting in that walking. And if you're going to double dip to get the nature, walk in nature and get both. But
absolutely.
the walking is when I felt like my cortisol levels were just super high and I had to bring everything down a notch. I just went with very slow lifting and I did long walks, and it was amazing how my body, and it could have been inflammation also that had to come down, but my body did change doing that instead of the constant jumping and the running long distance. I still love that, but that's more of a passion to do once in a while than a reason to lose weight using
Yeah,
it.
right.
The other thing that you mentioned was, if you're feeling really frisky and feeling good, add that hit session in, that high intense interval training. Um, and the outside grounding. And I do love that once in a while. Sometimes you just need to get your feet in the sand, in the grass. I do it on my
Sure.
pool deck just to get that warmth in my feet. And that feels good. Thank you for your explanation too on supplementation, because there is a time and a place for it with someone very qualified like you. So thank you very much for bringing that up, because it sounds like there are things that you can do to help the body do what it's supposed to do before we go into maybe actual hormones and medication. So that's
Sure.
fantastic. Dr. J, this has been amazing. And for the
Well,
listeners, just to let you know, this is not the end. We have so much more to discuss. And this actually overlaps really nicely with episode 31. We brought up some of the same things again, but it bears repeating because there's so much information out there. Sometimes we have to hear things more than once to learn and to really apply. And I would
sure.
love it, Dr. J, if you tell everyone what are the best places to find you?
Um, well, let's see. Across social media, and that would mean to me, I spend most of my time on Twitter because of its presence of other physicians. But there's, anyway, so Twitter, Instagram, what else do we have going on this Heidi runs that for
Well, I
us?
definitely know
Although,
Instagram because that's where I follow you, because we talked about this before, but Twitter, I still have to figure that all out. It's still a little, it's a place where you have inspired me to get into it a little bit more. But you do have an incredible Twitter following. You have an incredible Instagram also. And yes, your behind the scenes person, Heidi, is running these for you. We'll give her credit today.
yeah, so most anywhere that we're on social media, it's at Hormone Diet Doc. So that's where you can find me on social media. The other place to find me is at my website, which is simply drjwrigley.com. And those are the two places to see where I spend my time educating. And that's mainly what my goal is to do through both the website and social media, is to try to the word doctor comes from the Latin word docere, which means teacher. And I find that so many doctors just lost their way or just forgot about that or whatnot. But that's what we're supposed to be doing, is to educate people to the point where they don't need to come see us. That's where the real work is done, is to try to, what I love is anybody who is familiar with Dr. Philip Avadia, who's a heart surgeon and a good friend of mine now. But he wrote a book, and it's called Stay Off My Operating Table. And now he's making a pretty big presence on social media. And that is his thing. It's, I don't want to cut on you. And that's weird for a surgeon to say, because this is what they're trained to do. This is what they love to do. And this is what you can usually rarely talk them out of doing if you're in their office. But here's one who is saying, don't need me. Don't get yourself into a position where you need me to go cut your chest open and operate on your heart. And how you do that is, and he's got his own setup that would be very much in alignment with me and Kim about ways of eating and taking care of your metabolic and hormonal health and stuff like that. But I love to see doctors doing stuff like that. Like, let's try to get you to not need us.
I think that is a beautiful way to end, that you are a teacher and you're helping women so that they can help themselves and not have to be back with you all the time. And thank you for helping us out today by teaching. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So for everyone out there, please make sure you nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today. That's it. Thank you so much for tuning into the Emotional Eats podcast, the podcast that's here to help you feel amazing, strong, energetic, and healthy holistically in your mind and your body. But my guest and I also want to help you build great habits to help you with long-term mental and physical health so that you can lean into aging in a very positive and strong way. Check out my website, kimhines.com, and please come see me on Instagram at kimhineshealth. That's where I leave tips for healthy life, healthy body, healthy relationship with food. And I also am there to encourage you, and I love to hear from you. So tag me and let me know what you like about the show and what you want to hear more about. Check out the show notes for all the details. Make sure to rate and review the podcast. And until our next time together, nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today.